Good morning. I want to share this morning about the faithfulness of God and the power of God and the faithfulness of a man called Daniel and his friends. I don't know how many of you know that much about Daniel, but if we set it in the context of Daniel was a prophet. Go back a bit further than that. The children of Israel did not follow God's way. This is way back in the Old Testament, okay? And eventually they split into two nations. And the northern kingdom was called Israel, and the one in the south of the land was called Judah. And because they kept being disobedient, God decided to punish them, in a sense. Punish them. And he allowed the Assyrians to take Israel into captivity, and they were gone. And that was the end of them as children of 10 tribes disappeared, really. And then about 120 years later, as Judah had continued to be disobedient also, he allowed King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon to take Judah into captivity. And the book of Daniel is set in Babylon, in that captivity. And Daniel arrived in Babylon, and the king, Nebuchadnezzar, was looking for some young men, possibly royalty, possibly fine people of the nation that he'd just taken captive, so that they might learn all about the Babylonian culture and the language and stuff like that. And Daniel and 3 of his friends were chosen, and they were Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. And he wanted them to learn about Babylon. But God had a different plan. So the king wanted them to eat the food that he gave them and drink his wine. But Daniel was resolved. It says in Scripture, he was resolved not to defile himself. He would not compromise himself. He wouldn't enter into a mixture of anything that wasn't known to him as godly. It's just a bit like Mike Phillips shared 2 weeks ago. He was all for God, and he would not defile himself or go that way. So he would only eat vegetables and drink water. And he convinced the people who were sort of looking after these 4 young men that that's what they should do. They should eat vegetables and drink water and not eat the food from the king. And he said, give us a test. Test us. We'll do it for 10 days, and you can see what we look like and see how we are compared to the other young men who had been brought and were prepared to eat anything. And the answer to that was, faithful God ensured that these faithful men did well. They did very well, and they were in a better state than all the rest. And it says that, this is in Daniel chapter 1, verse 17. As for these 4 youths, because these were youths, they were not men. They were probably only late teenagers or something like that. God gave them learning and skill in all literature and wisdom, and Daniel had understanding in all visions and dreams. And the king spoke to them, and he got them before him, and he asked them questions about all sorts of things. And he said he found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. And Daniel was there until the first year of King Cyrus. He was going to be there a long time. So, the story unfolds in Daniel chapter 2 because Nebuchadnezzar had a dream. And he called for all his wise men to tell him about this dream. The problem was, he didn't know what the dream was. He wanted to know what the dream was, and he wanted to know what the interpretation was. And they all said, it can't be done. We can't do that. If you tell us the dream, we'll tell you an interpretation. But he said, no, I'm not having that. I want the dream and the interpretation, and I want you wise men to tell me. And if you don't, then you shall be torn limb from limb, and your house laid in ruins. They were a pretty tough lot, this Babylonian guys. So the king was furious, and in the end he decided, well, I'm going to kill them all. I get rid of them all, because they can't do what I want. I shall kill them all. And that meant that he was going to kill Daniel and his friends as well. So Daniel spoke to the king's captain and asked if he could see the king so that he might explain things in due course. And he spoke to his friends, probably not so formally as it's written in Daniel.
Are you hungry?
I'm not hungry, no. Where did that come from? Oh, love it. Okay. So Daniel spoke to his friends, and he said, we need to pray. You know, you think he asked them that they would seek the God of heaven. And you think, if you were about to be slain, I'm sure you would say something, you know, in modern days, look guys, we need to get before God and pray and let him tell us what this dream is, and then I can maybe God will give us the interpretation. And this is what they did. And it says, Daniel went to his house and made the matter known to his companions and told them to seek mercy from the God of heaven. And then the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision of the night. Then Daniel blessed the God of heaven. I'm sure he did. And he answered, I love this. This is Old Testament, but it's so, to me, it's like New Covenant. Blessed be the name of God forever and ever, in whom belong wisdom and might. He changes times and seasons. He removes kings and sets up kings. He gives wisdom to the wise, knowledge to those who have understanding. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what is in the darkness, and the light dwells with him. To you, O God of my fathers, I give thanks and praise, for you have given me wisdom and might, and have now made known to me what we asked of you. For you have made known to us the king's matter. Hallelujah. So Daniel then made an appointment to go in and speak to the king. And I'm going to have a drink of water, sorry. He was going to reveal it all, because God had revealed it to him. But Daniel answered the king and said, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or astrologer can show to the king the mystery that the king has asked, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries, and he has made known to King Nebuchadnezzar what will be in the last days. and the mystery is revealed. And it's a picture, it's an image. And the image was of a statue made of parts of a body. And the head was of fine gold, and its chest and arms were of silver, and its middle and thighs were of bronze, and its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of clay. And the iron and the clay, wait a minute, sorry. Looking at the image, while they were looking at it, he'd got this image, and this is what Nebuchadnezzar had seen. He'd seen the body made of all these different parts of precious metals and things. But then, carved out of a rock was a stone, and a stone came and smashed him on the feet. And the feet and body all fell to bits and crumbled. And it actually says, the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold all together were broken in pieces and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors, and the wind carried them away. So not a trace could be found of them. But the stone that struck the image became a great mountain and filled the whole earth. And he said, this is the vision that you saw. And then he goes on to give the interpretation of it. And he said to Nebuchadnezzar, you are the head of gold, and after you will come an inferior kingdom, another kingdom, which will arise, and that will be the silver bit, and then another kingdom will arise, and that is the bronze, and then finally a fourth kingdom. It's strong, but it's mixed. And we come to understand these days that those kingdoms were the kingdoms of Babylon, the Medo-Persian Empire, the Greek Empire, and then the Roman Empire. But the one that was a stone that grew into a mountain is the kingdom of our God. And he said, this will happen during the time of these kingdoms. And that essentially is what happened. And in the days of those kings, the King of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. And nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all those kingdoms, bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made this known to the king. What shall be after this? This dream is certain, and its interpretation is sure. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was astounded that this had all happened and that he was getting an interpretation like that, especially, I suppose, because he was the head of gold. But anyway, he said to Daniel, truly, your God is God of gods and Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you have been able to reveal this mystery. And when he said, a great God has revealed this to them, it doesn't make it clear why God revealed it to Nebuchadnezzar, other than to know perhaps that his kingdom was not going to go on for a long, long time. There would be other kingdoms, and they would come and they would go. But this is what he said. A great God has made this known to the king. And he promoted Daniel to be over the whole province of Babylon, and he asked that his friends be made prefects or whatever in Babylon as well. So, out of what was a mystery and a problem and their prayers, God answered in a way that only God can. And this is the power of our God at work. Remember, this is our God as he is then, as he is now. So, we move on into Daniel chapter 3. He may have got a measure of an idea that there was a God in heaven, but it didn't mean that he became immediately modest and, what should we say? Well, leave it at that. Because in Daniel chapter 3, Daniel tells us that Nebuchadnezzar built a statue of himself, or had built for him, a statue that was about 85 feet tall and about 8 feet across at the bottom, of gold. And he set it up on a plain in Babylon. And he wanted all of his hierarchy, people to come, the wonderful names, he said, to gather the satraps, the prefects, and the governors, the councillors, the treasurers, the justices, and the magistrates, and all the officials of the provinces to come to the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. And it unfolds that when the music played, the herald said, when the music plays, everyone must bow down and worship this statue of Nebuchadnezzar. And if you don't, you will be thrown into a fiery furnace. Now, you may have heard of the story of the fiery furnace, but anyway, this is where it comes from. And it turns out that although, there's another little bit. The names of these young men were changed into Babylonian names. So Daniel's companions were called Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, or Abednego. Okay? And they weren't as popular as you might think when you think these fine young men, they're doing the king's job and they're ruling over the provinces and all the rest of it, but they weren't popular with the Babylonians, and the Babylonians wanted to get rid of them, really. So they wanted to, well, they tricked them, really, because this thing had been set up, and these people everybody was to bow down, and they knew jolly well that Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego, and Daniel were not actually bowing down and worshipping this thing. So they went and told the king, and they told the king these guys were not doing that. And he was very cross. In fact, the word used is furious. They don't fall down and worship you. And so Nebuchadnezzar said, well, there's only one thing for it. You go and find these people, bring them to me, and I'll ask them about it, and we'll see where we go from there. And the answer is, they came, he said, there are certain Jews who do not pay attention to you, Lord. And he said to them, is it true, O Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the golden image that I have set up? If you're ready to fall down, great. But if you do not worship, you shall immediately be cast into a burning fiery furnace. And who is the God who will deliver you out of my hands? Now, these guys were absolutely solid for God. I love this. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego answered and said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we have no need to answer you in this matter. If this be so, our God whom we serve is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us out of your hand. But if not, be it known to you, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the golden image that you have set up. Well, he got even crosser apparently. And he ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than it normally was. Now, how you do that, I don't know. Chuck more wood on it, I suppose. But anyway, it was hot. And he ordered that mighty men from his kingdom bind the men up, take them up to wherever they could drop them into the furnace. And it was so hot that the men who took them up, they died, they got killed because it was so hot. But they were cast, the flame of the fire, they were cast into the fiery furnace, bound in their cloaks, their tunics, their hats, and all their garments. But it didn't go quite how Nebuchadnezzar had expected, because our faithful God respected the faithfulness of these men. And it says, this is what Nebuchadnezzar said, "Did we not cast 3 men bound into the fire?" They answered and said to the king, "True, O king." He answered and said, "But I see 4 men, unbound, walking in the midst of the fire, and they are not hurt, and the appearance of the 4th is like a son of God." Then Nebuchadnezzar came near to the door of the fiery furnace and said, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out and come here." And they came out of the fire. And when they came out of the fire, they were completely untouched. There wasn't a hair singed. There wasn't a burn mark on their garments. The bindings had, I suppose, burnt and dropped off. But they were not in any way touched. And the amazing thing, have you ever been in a bonfire or near a bonfire? And you end up smelling of bonfire smoke. Well, it says, there was no smell of fire had come upon them. Now, I think, I don't know about you, but I think the power of our God, who has done this, is astounding. Now, God works miracles. I know he works miracles. But when you think of his law of physics and chemistry and combustion and everything else that is involved in men being thrown into a fiery furnace and coming out untouched and not even a wisp of a smell of smoke, I think it's just astounding. But that is the power of our God and his faithfulness to these young men. This is our God at work. And he made a decree, Nebuchadnezzar. He says, any people, nation, or language that speaks anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be torn limb from limb. They went in for that, didn't they? And their houses laid in ruins, for there is no other God who is able to rescue in this way. Absolutely. Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego in the province of Babylon. And then the king himself, remember this is a pagan king, praises him. And he says, King Nebuchadnezzar, to all the peoples, nations, and languages that dwell in all the earth, peace be multiplied to you. It has seemed good to me to show the signs and wonders that the Most High God has done for me. How great are his signs, how mighty his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion endures from generation to generation. He wanted these young men to learn about Babylon, but they are teaching him about another kingdom altogether, and God is at work. And he's honoring the God with these powerful signs. And so you move on to the next event, because this book is rich in events of miraculous proportions, really. In Daniel 4, Nebuchadnezzar has another dream. Now, in this time, he remembers the dream, but he has no idea what it means. So once again, he calls in all these wise men, and they have no idea. And eventually Daniel is called in, and the dream is told to him. And he tells Daniel what the dream is. And it's a dream about a huge tree that grows right up to the heavens, and it is a beautiful tree, and the birds live in its branches, and there's shade for animals, and there's food, and everything is fed. But there's a little, you think everything's sweet and nice, but then it says, I saw in the visions of my head as I lay in my bed, and behold, a watcher, a holy one, came down from heaven. He proclaimed aloud and said thus, chop down the tree and lop off its branches, strip off its leaves, and scatter its fruit. Let the beasts flee. But leave the stump of its roots in the earth, bound with a band of iron and bronze, amid the tender grass of the field. Let him be wet with the dew of heaven. Let his portion be with the beasts of the grass of the earth. Let his mind be changed from a man's, and let a beast's mind be given to him, and let 7 periods of time pass over him. The decisions by the word of the holy ones, that the living may know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. This is the dream I had. Well, he asks Daniel to interpret that. And it actually says here, and Daniel wrote, then Daniel was dismayed for a while, and his thoughts alarmed him. But he didn't have to go away and seek God. God gave him an explanation. And he just goes straight into explaining to Nebuchadnezzar what the dream was. He says, the dream you saw, which grew and became strong so that its top reached to the heavens. It's you, O king. You have grown and become strong. Your greatness has grown and reaches to heaven, and your dominion is to the end of the earth. And because the king saw a watcher, a holy one, coming down from heaven and saying, chop down the tree and leave a stump in its roots. He said, it's a decree of the Most High which has come upon my lord the king, that you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. You shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and you shall be wet with the dew of heaven, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you, till you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men. He gives it to whom he will. Your kingdom will be confirmed for you when the time that you know that heaven rules. So break off your sins by practicing righteousness, and your iniquities by showing mercy to the oppressed, that there may perhaps be a lengthening of your prosperity. If I was Daniel in those circumstances, I think I would have been pretty scared, actually, to say that to this man who likes tearing people limb from limb. But he just delivered it because that is what God gave him in his heart to say. And it goes on because at the end of 12 months, this same Nebuchadnezzar, who still is, fairly proud of himself and all the rest of it, he said he was walking on the roof of the royal palace of Babylon. And bear in mind, these palaces were pretty grand. The Hanging Gardens of Babylon are one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Not that we really know what they look like, because they got blown away like chaff in the wind. But anyway, he was walking on the roof of his palace, and he says, is not this great Babylon, which I have built by my mighty power as a royal residence and for the glory of my majesty? God. You think, well, cocky monkey, really. And it said, he records here, while the words were still in the king's mouth, there fell a voice from heaven. O King Nebuchadnezzar, it is spoken to you that the kingdom is departed from you. And you shall be driven from among men, and your dwelling shall be with the beasts of the field. And you shall be made to eat grass like an ox, and 7 periods of time shall pass over you until you know that the Most High rules the kingdom of men and gives it to whom he will. And he was driven out, and he became a beast, an animal. Now, again, this is our God at work. And you think, how amazing is that? Is a man got a body of a man, and he is given the mind of a beast, and the body must have been changed in somehow to eat grass and presumably go around on all fours. And he was like that until his hair grew like eagle's feathers and his fingernails were like bird's claws. I always remember my mother saying to me, "You've got nails like Nebuchadnezzar, they need cutting." They were never that bad, but it's something that's stuck in my mind, funnily enough. Bird's claws, you've got nails like bird's claws. So this happened to him, and this man was turned. Now, we don't know how long 7 periods of time are. 7 days, it must have been long, because his hair grew long. So it could have been 7 months, maybe it was 7 years, but 7 periods of time. And at the end of that time, Nebuchadnezzar is restored. It says, "At the end of the days, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my reason returned to me. And I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever." And then there's this wonderful prayer from this man. "For his dominion is an everlasting dominion, and his kingdom endures from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are accounted as nothing, and he does according to his will amongst the hosts of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth, and none can stay his hand or say to him, 'What have you done?'" So his reason returned, and his kingdom was given back to him, really. He said, "Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, for all his works are right, his ways are just, and those who walk in pride, he is able to humble." He realizes that was the purpose, really, that he had been humbled, and that there is a God over all. And this pagan man, who was pretty ruthless, finally came to realize that there is a God in heaven, and that he is over all things, even to the point of turning a man into a beast and feeding him, and then bringing him back from that state, back to a man, and giving him his kingdom back. Remarkable. But it didn't last, because at the end of that chapter, that is the last we hear of Nebuchadnezzar. Because in Daniel chapter 5, his son is on the throne. So, farewell Nebuchadnezzar. He must have died, or whatever it was not worthy to be noted. So we next come across Daniel dealing with Nebuchadnezzar's son, called Belshazzar. And he was just one generation down from his father. So he knew everything that had happened to his father. And he knew that his father had said, "There is a God in heaven and earth, he is over all things." But he was another proud man. And he had a feast. And it says the feast was for 1,000 of his lords and his their family, wives and concubines and all the rest of it. And one of the things that had happened when the children of Israel, Judah, was taken away into captivity, they had taken the gold vessels from the temple and put them in the treasury of Babylon. And I suppose they've been there for a long time. Anyway, Belshazzar is having such a wonderful time with his 1,000 people and all the rest of it. He asked that the gold vessels be brought out of the treasury and they would drink their wine out of that and eat from the place, but it's the drinking, really. They drank wine and praised the gods of gold and silver, bronze, iron, wood, and stone. Their gods. Immediately, the fingers of a human hand appeared and wrote on the plaster of the wall of the king's palace opposite the lampstand. And the king saw the hand as it wrote. Then the king's colour changed, and his thoughts alarmed him, and his limbs gave way, and his knees knocked together. I mean, this must have been a pretty scary kind of a thing. Just imagine there's something, a single hand came up here and started to write something on the wall up there while I was speaking. It might worry me a bit as well. And the king called for all his wise men, the usual crew, but they couldn't do anything. He promised them gifts, but they hadn't got an idea what it was all about. And then the queen, she remembered Daniel. And she remembered what had gone before and said, "There is a man in your kingdom in whom the spirit of the holy gods in the days of your father, light and understanding and wisdom like the wisdom of the gods were found in him." So they go and get Daniel, and they ask Daniel to interpret the handwriting that is on the wall. But before he does that, Daniel speaks to him. And he said, "I'm not bothered about your gifts or anything like that. I will read the writing in the wall. But your father was Nebuchadnezzar, and kingship and greatness and glory, and you knew what had happened to him. But when his heart was lifted up and his spirit was hardened so that he dealt proudly, he was brought down from his kingly throne, and the glory was taken away, and he was turned into a beast. And you knew all that, but you have lifted up yourself against the Lord of heaven. And the vessels of his house have been brought in before you and your lords and your wives, their wives and your concubines, have drunk wine from them. And you have praised the gods of silver and gold, of bronze and iron, wood and stone, which you do not see or hear or know. But the God in whose hand is your breath, and whose are all your ways, you have not honoured." He was really angry at what had happened. This man had had the opportunity to be humble, but here he was living it up, and he was obviously upsetting, desperately upsetting to Daniel, who was a man of truth and of God and all the rest of it. And then from his presence the hand was sent, and this writing was inscribed. And this is the writing that's inscribed. It's Mene, Mene, Tekel, and Parsin. And this is the interpretation of the matter. Mene, God has numbered the days of your kingdom and brought it to an end. Tekel, you have been weighed in the balances and found wanting. Peres, your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians. And Belshazzar was glad that somebody had been able to interpret it all. You'd have thought he'd have been a bit shocked, really. But anyway, it says they clothed Daniel with this and put a gold chain around him and all the rest of him, which he didn't really want anyway. But that very night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was killed. And Darius the Mede received the kingdom, being 62 years old. And that represents a change of kingdoms from Babylon to the Medo-Persian Empire. So one of the kingdoms of the great statue has gone already. And the next chapter we hear, there is a King Darius the Mede. And that's in Daniel 6. And I hope just to be able to get through that. Darius was now king, and he rearranged his cabinet, he changed the way he ran things, and he wanted to make Daniel the chief of his rulers, and the other Babylonian people, the other Medes didn't like that. They schemed up a way to trap Daniel doing something wrong in his worship of God, because he didn't do anything wrong otherwise. He did a wonderful job. And they thought the only way we can trick him, catch him and get rid of him, is by doing something about his worship. So they got Darius to agree to an ordinance that everyone had to make petition to pray to him, Darius. And they did it in a way that is called the law of the Medes and Persians. I don't know whether you've ever heard of the law of the Medes and Persians, but they are unchangeable. Once a law is made, it cannot be changed. And Darius fell for this, really, and he signed it off and said, okay, everybody's got to bow down for me for a month. And then immediately, having heard that, Daniel went to his room and carried on doing what he'd always done, which is to pray towards Jerusalem. And 3 times a day, that's what he did. And of course, the Medes came in and found him doing that. And of course, they went and told the king. And the punishment of this was that whoever was found not bowing down wasn't going into a fiery furnace this time. They were going into a den of lions. And fed to the lions, really. So Daniel was in line, if you pardon that, in line for the lions. And Darius was very upset because he liked Daniel. He thought he was a very good man, and he was going to have made him the chief of all of the rulers. But he had to do what he said he would do. So Daniel had to go into the lion's den. It was the law. And he signed the document, blah, blah, blah. Then the king commanded, and Daniel was brought and cast into the den of lions. And the king declared to Daniel, "May your God, whom you serve continually, deliver you." And a stone was brought, laid over the mouth of the tomb. And the king went to his palace, spent the night fasting, and sleep fled from him. And at break of day, he got up and rushed off to the lion's den to see what had happened. And he said to Daniel, "O Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to deliver you from the lions?" Then Daniel said to the king, "O king, live forever. My God sent his angel and shut the lions' mouths, and they have not harmed me, because I was found blameless before them. And also before you, O king, I have done no harm." And the king was exceedingly glad and commanded that they get Daniel out of the lion's den. And they found not a scratch on him. Not so much as a scratch. And the king commanded, and those men who had maliciously accused him were cast into the den of the lions. They, their children, and their wives. And they reached the bottom. Before they reached the bottom of the den, the lions overpowered them and broke all their bones in pieces. King Darius wrote to all of his peoples, and he said, "Peace be multiplied to you. I make a decree that in all my royal dominion, people are to tremble and fear before the God of Daniel." That's our God. "For he is the living God, enduring forever. His kingdom shall never be destroyed, and his dominion shall be to the end. He delivers and rescues. He works signs and wonders in heaven and on earth. He who has saved Daniel from the power of the lions. And this Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. And eventually, the children of Israel were able to go back to Judah. They were given permission to go back. But this is Darius. He was another pagan man, but he was completely overwhelmed by God and the action that he'd seen, that this man had been spared by his God and that God had been able to keep him. May your God, whom you serve, continually deliver you. And he did. I can't imagine being in a situation like that. I don't know about you. Just about to be thrown into a lion's den. You think, will I be all right in there? Will I get away with that? Will I come out of it alive? But this young man, well, he must have been a bit older by now, but this man had such a faith in God, and his heart was right with his God, that God honored him, and his faithfulness and God's faithfulness kept him from all harm. So that's another pagan ruler came to see that there is no God like our God, the living God, and his dominion shall have no end. It's great to know that we are in safe hands, really. There is none like our God. God has controlled these kingdoms of history, the Assyrians and the Babylonians and the Greeks and the Romans, and he brought them, or he allowed them to come to power, and then he swept them away. But on the way, there was a stone taken, and a godly kingdom was raised up that is different from the kingdom in the Old Testament, the New Testament. And it came from Jesus and his death upon the cross and on his resurrection and his pouring out of his Spirit after he ascended into heaven. The Spirit was poured out. And that kingdom is part of the kingdom which we can enjoy to this day. But the other kingdoms were all blown away like chaff. And so too, if you think about it, was the Soviet Union. And the Berlin Wall came down. And God is over all these things. And there is Russia, and there is Ukraine, and there is China, and there is Sudan. And that God is over all of these things. His kingdom reigns forever. And we can be bold enough to call ourselves children of that God, children of that kingdom. I heard it prayed this morning, the kingdom of his love. No, the God of the kingdom, the child of his love. I can't remember, it's from Colossians 1, isn't it? And that's where we are. And if you're not, and you don't know that you are, then today, now, you have that opportunity to seek God, the God of Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and of Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and the God of Nebuchadnezzar, and the God of Darius, and our God. Yeah. Well, let's pray. Father, I thank you that out of this book you demonstrate, as we read these truths, that you are the great God over all. And you have done amazing, miraculous signs. It's not just miraculous signs for this age, Lord, when the Spirit has been poured out on all flesh, but in those days, in the Old Covenant, in the Old Testament, when your people were being punished ostensibly, but you took them to Babylon and then used them to change pagan men into godly men, or men who recognized that there was a God over all. But the miracles that you wrought along the way were amazing. And you are a miracle-working God today. And you can work those miracles in hearts and lives and in bodies and in every way. So we thank you. We thank you for this opportunity of being together. I thank you for brothers and sisters in Christ. And I thank you for all that we share, Lord. The knowledge that we go on, and we will go on, and we can keep going on, because you've put your life within us, and we can walk in you, with you inside, not just beside you, but with you inside us. Amazing. And I praise you and thank you for all of that. Amen. Amen. I did wonder if we might sing Our God is an Awesome God, which is number 251, to sort of close. Is that all right?